and how to use that for brain functional imaging, for reading the brain activities, and use brain neuromodulation for possible kind of writing information in the brain. And our recent progress in studying non-invasive closed-loop ultrasound BMI and conclusions. The brain-machine interface is a powerful communication tool between brain and external device. Interface technology are divided into those that read to the brain to record brain activity and decode its meaning, and those that write to the brain to manipulate the activities to specific regions and affect their function. The application of BMI spreads across multiple and diverse fields. Applications includes but not limited to medical, education, self-regulation, games, and entertainment, automatic driving. So this kind of non-invasive BMI has already become the research frontiers and demonstrated a very promising development prospect. You know, many recent publications in Science, Nature, Cells, Science, Robotics indicates non-invasive BMI devices technology are really in urgent needs. So despite the remarkable progress in the past decades, the ability to monitor and modulate the dynamics of neural system is still insufficient to clarify, interpret the signals and manipulate them. Therefore, we should develop high-resolution neural recording and possibly through imaging and a stimulation tool, possibly for writing, to obtain and modulate the whole brain neuron circuits and to achieve more reliable applications, more convenient, easy to wear, and more with very wide, possible applications. So I'll go through three parts. First, using ultrasound for brain functional imaging, for brain activity, neural activity reading. Ultra-fast ultrasound makes functional ultrasound more sensitive. Use a large number of transmitted and received ultrasound wave to achieve to complete imaging of the target area. Thousands imaging frame rate allows functional ultrasound to capture some rapid and small changes, such as changing the micro blood flow and external stimulation. Ultrasound microflow imaging could image the structure of cerebral blood flow and reflect its microflow information. Dr. Cantor group in France, they presented wonderful progress in this area. We collected two-dimensional sections every 200 microns and use these two-dimensional sections to completely reconstruct the whole cerebral blood flow structure and microflow images. This figure shows the figure A and C shows that beam ultrasound, the imaging of the coronal and the sagittal plane of the rat brain respectively, and figure B and C shows the corresponding blood flow maps. The three-dimensional sonogram of the rat brain was acquired starting from the lambda point, mobile towards the pragma point in a step of 200 microns. The figures on the right show the one brain slides. Actually, we got 53 slides and with the slide step of 200 microns. And this is reconstructed with three-dimensional images we published 3 years ago. The quietest three-dimensional brain ultrasound image was filtered by the SVD, and the tissue information was filtered out to preserve the cerebral blood flow map of the rat, which shows the three-dimensional blood flow between pragma and lambda. You actually can see the brain flow clearly in the 3D format. And also we use this method to monitor brain glioma tumor in the living small animal. It can be seen that ultrasound flow imaging can not only distinguish tumor from normal tissue, but also reflect the blood flow information inside the tumor. And besides, we compare the blood flow intensities in the same area in the normal rat and the rat with glioma. And we can see the functional ultrasound imaging can be based on the CBV to distinguish between different types of the gliomas. And the left slide shows the main intensity of blood flow in the eye of the left and the right hemispheres calculated from 25 normal rat samples. The results show that there were small differences in the blood flow distribution between the left and right hemispheres of the normal rats. The right side of the figure shows comparison between normal left hemisphere and the tumor region. The results indicate the distribution of the blood flow intensity in the normal region is approximately the same, but the blood flow intensity in tumor region varies greatly and different appear. So move on to the, in addition to the rat study, we move on to the primate animal for the brain imaging using ultrasound. The monkey was fixed on the monkey chair and the coronal tree was performed on this corresponding visual cortex area. During the experiments, ultrasound transducers were fixed to the area needed for imaging acquisition, and the transducer was connected to the ultrasound signal acquisition system. During the experiments, the monkeys actually were visually stimulated by the bright spots of motion on the screen directly in front of the monkeys. As you can see, the stimulation signal spiral, and also we could apply the flow images. The monkeys were stimulated with the dot motion pattern shown in the upper left panel, and determine whether the monkey responds to the stimuli. The stimuli pattern was used about 3 seconds of rest, 3 seconds of dot stimulation. The lower left picture collected the cerebral blood flow map on the monkey. As can see from the lower picture, there was some stimulant and blood flow signals in the corresponding visual cortex can be seen to increase the generation of the stimuli. And while in the non-visual cortex, intensity of the blood flow signal was not changed significantly with the generation of the stimuli. And the top and the bottom imaging respectively show the dot stimulation pattern was different intensity in the same visual cortex region. When the dot signal is strong, obvious change in the blood flow intensity can be, flow intensity can be seen. While the dot signal is weak, no obvious change in blood flow intensity can be seen actually. And we made a 3-dimensional map of the entire visual cortex monkey. And actually you can see in this video, we adopt method of rotation of 180 degrees of the 3-dimensional position is scanning transformation in the latter stage. The final 3-dimensional image is showing the figure, and the transducer is normal 1D, but the rotational 360 degrees by itself to acquire 3-dimensional image. So the brain, imaging by ultrasound, to see the blood flow information correlated with the brain activities. Actually, we want to validate. We really want to get a validation if the blood flow really information very accurately relationship to the no-call neuron firing activities. The good is that we recently noticed a paper on neuron which present the neural correlates of the blood flow measured by ultrasound. Actually, it shows a simple and accurate relationship to neural firing, which is great. You know, we correct the imaging, even in the MRI functional imaging, as you all know, the MRI functional imaging, actually the body imaging, it also recorded the blood flow information, not the real direct kind of neural activities. But I think this correlation, accurate, simple, direct correlation between the blood flow and the neural firing is very good, you know, stimulation, encouraging information for our kind of functional brain image. So I studied the paper, the figure. This figure actually, you know, shows the functional ultrasound in the brain image has a wide range of applications, from mice to primates, even to humans. You know, from scientific research even to disease diagnosis. Functional ultrasound can be used in different fields and shows great potential for different areas of brain science, you know, to multiple scale and real-time dynamic high resolution or many good advantages. And the brain reading technology, you know, there are some classic technology, including the LFP, spikes, echo, ECG, non-invasive methods such as ECG, functional MRI, and PET. But for the real time, I think the two-dimensional kind of imaging, I think the functional ultrasound causes great attention for the brain imaging. It provides excellent temporal and spatial resolution, which allows ultrasound imaging to capture faster changes in the information, such as the cerebral blood flow, while capturing the whole brain structure at the same time. The change of the blood flow have a relationship with brain neural activity based on the neural blood coupling mechanism, also the direct correlation with neuron spikes. In addition, ultrasound imaging is portable, real-time, making it very suitable for non-time kind of monitoring of brain functions. The second part I want to discuss with you the brain modulation using ultrasound. And if we can modulate the neural activity, does that mean a possible future kind of writing information use ultrasound modulation? I think it's a very interesting question, but we are making steps forward. So the ultrasound stimulation, as you all are familiar already, the mechanical sensitive kind of arm modulation, we are really interested, which are capable of detecting, responding to the mechanical stimuli generated by ultrasound mechanical wave, especially the radiation force induced by the ultrasonic wave, can be sort of mechanical sensitive nano valve, kind of open, close of the nano valve, the mechanical ion channel, and confer kind of neuron response specifically to ultrasound stimulation. We, eventually really want to make it firstly effective, but also through this kind of mechanical sensitive channel opening, close, which is really, develop a kind of sonogenetics kind of very specifically to open this kind of type of channel. We presented the results of study based on the kind of carried out on the neuron stimulation chip, ultrasound chip, and the current clamp recording demonstrated the ultrasound elicited the burst of spikes, the I91L kind of expressed neurons, but not in the whited, kind of infected and controlled neurons. And also, ultrasound can precisely control the spike chains. Obviously there are some ultrasound kind of acoustic pressure threshold and optimal acoustic range to excite this kind of stimulation and spikes. in this study shows 0.25 megapascal to the 0.45 megapascals. So it's a very interesting steps for us to understand what is the underlying mechanism behind the ultrasonic stimulation. And also with wearable ultrasonic stimulation devices with developing in lab, we already carried out various types of small animal studies in treatment of Parkinson's disease, morphine addictions, epilepsy study, and we published these results. And yes, we already seen the very kind of positive results on using ultrasound to do kind of non-neural degenerative kind of disease, neuropsychiatric disorder disease. In our recent programs on using ultrasound stimulator to do the monkeys kind of study, we stimulate on the DIPFC kind of viral related kind of neuron function, kind of neural nuclear, which also evoked the functional activation, positive and negative on the targets and the node associated with neuron circuits. And this we actually monitoring this kind of neuron activities and MI in the both signals. The target, we developed the MI compatible ultrasound stimulation system, electronics transducers, and also we level of the functional neural networks. We know that DIPFC is one of the important nodes of the default mode of network. Regulation of the DIPFC has caused change in the strings connection within the default mode of network. Actually, we also can see from the results the connection between the DIPFC, the angular gyres and the anterous cingulate gyres in the default mode network also decreased after ultrasound modulation. This is an important change. Previous study also shown the stronger negative feedback between the DIPFC and the anterous cingulate gyres, the better treatment effect of depression. So we have seen a potential regulation effect in normal monkeys. Does this really means a work on the improvement of the stimulation for the improvement of the depression? I think at least we could provide this data for you. And also we develop a depressive macaque model by injecting monkeys with this kind of drugs, glucocorticoids drugs. After the modeling was complete, the monkey were given ultrasound stimulation for 20 minutes a day and for 2 consecutive weeks. The stimulation types was on the left, the DIPFC, and the stimulation parameter the same as those of the normal monkeys. Functional MRI imaging showed that after the depression mode was established, the functional connection actually, for this kind of connectivity in the monkey default mode network was enhanced compared with the baseline. The connectivity between the DIPFC and the antero cingulate gyres was decreased significantly after 2 weeks of ultrasound modulation. This is quite consistent with previous experimental results. Behaviorally, ultrasound stimulation kind of was kind of improved, shown to improve the connective kind of behavior in monkeys, improve their overall sleep quality, such as sleep onset and latency, sleep efficacy, and waking times. We further exploring the validated ultrasound parameters. I think overall, the ultrasound stimulation can improve symptoms of depression in monkeys in our prelim studies. And also, we recently collaborated with Beijing Film Hospital on the safety and efficacy of validation ultrasound stimulation of healthy volunteers. Just carry out this recent few months. The multi-evoked and potential experiment can use ultrasound paradigm in neurological study, it was conducted to evaluate the change of the EMG signal induced by TMS and the different ultrasound effects. The experiment will we recruit 20 healthy volunteers, and its common target of area of the TMS ultrasound stimulation is the right and right motor cortex. We modulate the M1 region and use them to different set of ultrasound parameter. And the main difference between the two sets of parameter is the pulse width and the pulse repetition frequencies. The PTA of the burst parameters within the safe range can be seen from the results that the ultrasound preceded excitatory or ambulatory kind of regulatory effect and different parameters. And the 5-minute stimulation with the 5-minute stimulation and conventional effect of ultrasound can be maintained at least for 30 minutes. It's quite exciting for us. You know, we see some very preliminary results from this kind of human studies. And also the double pulse experiment also obtaining the similar results, which indicates ultrasound stimulation can evoke GABA A and GABA B related neuron circuits and lambda mediated excitatory post-synaptic electric activity, resulting in excitatory or inhibitory kind of effect. It's quite interesting. The last part I want to show you kind of recent progress based on EEG, kind of ultrasound BMI, brain machine interface, kind of very preliminary study results that based on non-invasive closed to loop ultrasound BMI. We established a closed loop ultrasound stimulation system based on EEG in a mouse epilepsy kind of model, automatically initiated ultrasound stimulation when the seizures are detected. We installed 3 electrodes in the skull of the mouse and ultrasound stimulates the left hippocampus. Mice moved freely, you know, during this kind of experiments. In addition, we used the BI-LSTM network to improve this classification accuracy and to improve that. And when the accuracy rate is steadily above 80%, in a closed loop system can reliably identify the epilepsy. And transcranial kind of ultrasound controlled by closed loop system can rapidly suppress the temporal lobe on the epilepsy induced by intrapaternal injections of the Ka drug. After the treatment, the short-term kind of survival rate of the epilepsy mice increased significantly. So CFOR's results indicate the ultrasound can activate hippocampus neuron. At the same time, ultrasound stimulation did not damage the brain tissue in the hippocampus. It proved this kind of closed loop ultrasound system, the very kind of proof of concept BMI can effectively and safely controls the epilepsy kind. We further use the ultrasound stimulated vagus nerve and establish a closed loop system for automatic control and to achieve the non-invasive epilepsy detection and treatment. You know, this is shown very detailed in these slides. And also we obtained the EEG signals from rat skull electrodes. Through the Bluetooth, the EEG signal will wirelessly transmitted to the host of real-time analysis. This kind of features were extracted to judge by threshold method. So the accuracy of the epilepsy recognition can reach more than 90%. Ultrasound stimulation is automatically triggered upon this detection of epilepsy. So this shows the structure of this kind of system. We use the different acoustic intensity of the ultrasound stimulation to verify the efficacy of the closed loop ultrasound VS in suppressing the epilepsy. This results should can terminate the PTZ, can induce the seizures very short period of time. Though very short, but very exciting, I believe. And we examined neural activity in the brain, the rat brain. We found the closed loop ultrasound VS reduced epilepsy, induced the kind of whole brain neural activity. That is the reverse abnormal high excitability of the epilepsy. We believe that the ultrasound stimulation stimulated the vagus, it plays a role in treatment for epilepsy through the vagal ascending kind of circuit. So I come to conclusion, non-invasive BMI is very fascinating, but very challenging. I hope hopefully really like high resolution ultrasound brain functional imaging, reading neural information, and also neural non-invasive kind of ultrasound neuromodulation could provide a potential tool for modulation and maybe in the future eventually writing information in the brain. So I think we work together. Let's work together for this non-invasive closed loop kind of ultrasound BMI. Though we should hear the very proof of concept, the results not very preliminary, but I think it's very exciting to share with the colleagues of you. This work is very nice in the disciplinary work, from the efforts for big team from my team in Shenzhen. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, that was awesome. So comprehensive set of studies, but I guess he is not available online. So I guess we will just move on to the next one. We have Daniel Schmidt next. Great. And
today I'll be talking about
not Casper yet. We have Daniel next. And he is talking about hybrid transcranial focusing, combining acoustic holograms and electronic beam steering.
Thank you for the introduction. Hope I'm getting accustomed to that. Can you open the presentation, please, again? So I'm Daniel, and I'm happy to be here in person, attending a conference for maybe something over 2 years again, and also presenting in front of a real audience. That's very cool. And I must, okay. So together with my co-authors, I'm with Fraunhofer IDMT here in Germany, in the ultrasound group there. And today I'm presenting our recent work on combining acoustic holograms and electronic beam steering with the goal of making some progress in hybrid transcranial focusing. So actually, our background is biomedical imaging, ultrasound imaging, and as all groups working there, we are heavily involved in electronic devices and electronic focusing. So we developed over the years a whole family of beamformer systems ranging from 128 to over 1K electric channels. We call that the DIFAS family, digital phased array systems. And we are not only using that in the framework of biomedical imaging, but also in technical applications like non-destructive testing and sonar applications. So we combine that with arrays and transducers ranging from 50 kilohertz to something like 50 megahertz, so a very broad range. And those devices can be MR compatible, like the one you see here. Okay. Yeah, here we go, like this one. So we started working in transcranial focusing a couple of years ago. So we went to higher intensities and longer pulses. So we complemented our systems with booster systems to enable higher power. And we also featured our transducers, the design with temperature sensors and active cooling to be able to apply those high power. And those systems obviously are MR compatible, like this one here and the transducers down there. So you might have seen the pitch of Mark yesterday. presenting an overview of what we are doing, and maybe you also had a chance to see in the hardware exhibition where we also had some devices. So actually we are team electronic focusing. On the other hand side, we work since a couple of years together with colleagues from Max Planck in a joint program called Acoustogramme. And actually we are doing two branches here, but using the same methodology. The first branch is where the colleagues in Max Planck are focusing on, is to use acoustic holograms to produce very complex fields. So the idea here is that you want to project a picture like this pigeon here in the medium. You calculate how the delays should look like. You encode that in such a faceplate, put that in front of a single element transducer, and with one electronic channel and one single element transducer, you can produce very complex patterns in the medium. The colleagues just managed to catch particles in the pressure foci, like bottles, bottle traps, and they also found a possibility to solidify that. So they now are on a goal, on the way to real doing additive manufacturing this ultrasound technique. On the other hand side, we are interested in imaging again, and we are using a randomized mask here. So the same system, single element transducer mask in front of it, but that's not structured, that's unstructured actually. And it's producing a very diverse ultrasound field. So you will get a different response from any point in the field. And if you know that response, then you can guess where the signal is coming from. So the idea is to recover the whole acoustic signal from a single A scan. And we currently managed to do that with some very easy phantoms like letters and those figures. And we are on the way to do that, to implement that also in medical beamforming. So we are also a bit of the team physical encoding. So, and then we thought, why is it not possible to combine those techniques? And we found on one hand side a very clever strategy to do so, and also some very interesting applications. So I have that here in a few pictograms. So that is classic electronic beamforming. You have an array. Sorry for that. Here. You have an array, you have multi-channel electronics, a lot of signals. You have a delay pattern on top of them, like this quadratic one. And if you do that correctly, you get a decent single point focus in the medium. It is known that you can do exactly the same with a lens, a focusing lens, and giving you the same shape and giving you the same acoustic field. And at the end of the day, if you have the equipment, you can do exactly the same also with an array. So you have plane wave electric signals, the same signal to each and every channel, and the system is exactly behaving like the single element transducer. If you have a aberration in structure like the human skull, it's getting a bit more difficult. Of course, if you apply the same pattern as in this case, you will get heavy distortion in the focus. So shift in the focus, shape shifting, and also some additional focusing. If you do a correction of this signal, you can recover the focus and get a clear focus beyond the skull bone again. And this was already shown to be feasible also with a static phase mask, a delay mask. Jean-François Aubry and others showed that in the past that you can get very good results, but this is static. So the difference actually between electronic focus and this physical focus is that you have a dynamic electronic focus. And I will now present on the next couple of slides a combination of both techniques. So we will have the array, we will have plane wave imaging, plane wave signals, and you will show a focus behind the skull. We will do additional phase shifting. So we will have the same mask, so there is nothing changed. The mask is still producing one single focus, but by electronic focusing, you will see that I can shift the focus, and this is dynamic. So I have a static mask showing a single spot focus behind the skull, and I can do the dynamic focusing, shifting of the focus. And at the end of the day, I will also show the baseline experiment, having that in free water to see that it's working from scratch. So a bit about experimental setup. So we have a number of skull bones at hand we can use for those measurements. We made a special fixture to fix the transducer and the skull bone to bring it into the MRI to do the segmentation and the calculation of the delays. And we have a hydrophone scanning system where we put exactly the same fixture in, and we can precisely measure the pressure field in the skull and behind the skull. From the systems, we are using one of those high fuse systems, having in this case around 100 volts output, can deliver 16 watts per channel into 256 channels. We use a custom delay tool in a low energy mode because we are not actually doing high view, but only hydrophone measurements. We use one of our transducers as well, 256 elements, around aperture, lambda pitch at 480 kilohertz. And we are manufacturing those face plates tailored to this transducer. We do that by simple, cost-efficient 3D printing. And in this case, in the study I'm showing, we use columnar pitch matched columns. So on top of every element here, you see one column of the actual mask. So short look into the workflow. How do we get data we need to do the mask? So we have, as I said before, this whole setup on the bed of the MRI. Sorry. We have markers in the transducer fixture, so we can detect the transducer and the aperture, especially in the cross section and here in the sagittal section. And we also can detect the target where we want to focus to. And with time reversal ray tracing algorithm, we can calculate the delays required. And from the delays, we can calculate by the velocity of sound the height of the mask at a special point. So I'm coming to a few of the results. So I'm starting with the free field experiments. I hope the pictogram can be seen over there. Yes, it is there. So this is the first setting. So I have full electronic focus array, and I have one clear spot focus at a distance of 90 millimeters. That was the target. And we get a Newton square pressure of around 480 kilopascals and full width half maximum here in pressure. So I remember the discussion of this morning in pressure, full width half maximum is 7.6 millimeters. If you do the same thing with the corresponding mask, so this is this picture again, we get a pretty similar cross section here, slightly slower, lower pressure, and a slightly higher dimension of the focus, a lateral dimension of the focus. I'm presenting to you also the XZ cross section here. Of course, we are diffraction limited, so we will get a long focus spot in the depth direction, of course. Yes, now the first result having additional phase shifting. So we have the same mask here as in the other, as in this experiment. But now I am doing electronic steering to 10 millimeters into one direction. And you see the focus is following. And just changing the signal here, doing another electronic focusing, I can also steer to 10, 15 mil. And again, this is dynamic, so I can do a movement of the focus in this plane, or more precisely on a sphere with the radius of 90 millimeter without changing actually the physical mass. So if you look a bit into detail what's happening here, so you see again the situation focus tilt in one direction only. And I plotted here the associated delay patterns. So what you see here is X and Y direction and time delay in microseconds. And actually this is the hybrid, the sum delay I require. And actually I decomposite that into a physical delay pattern, which is encoded in the mask. So this is static. And on top of that, I have this tilted in 2 dimensions. It's a plane, actually, a tilted plane, the electronic delays. And if you think now, what am I doing when I go to another focus spot here? I'm simply tilting that plane. And that is, of course, one of the advantages that's much easier to be implemented into a low budget hardware, for example, than a full-featured electronic focusing. So I guess you might be interested in what's happening behind the skull bone, of course. So some experimental results here. So on the left-hand side, you see now what's happening if I do not compensate. As said before, the focus is splitting, so I have a triplet of foci here. And also, of course, the energy is distributed among those foci, so that is not something I want to see. So I'm compensating electronically by changing the signals here. And you see I can more or less recover the focus again. And I can also encode this structure in the mask. And yeah, it's not so pretty anymore, but still, if you only look at the full width half maximum, that's fairly comparable. And we have some slight pressure here also in the rim of the structure. But it's not always working so good. So if I now start to superimpose the linear delay pattern, which was perfect in the last picture in 3-peak focusing, you see here that we have some deviations, but still the tendency is there to shift the main focus to the new spot. And we are currently trying to improve the situation here. So trying to wrap up some standard conclusion. We investigated into this hybrid focusing approach for transcranial focusing. We demonstrated how it is working, especially in free water, and what are the capabilities of hybrid electronic beam tilting. So you can combine the fixed focus of the mask with the active moving focus of the electronic system. And we showed that combination with aberration correction is possible in principle, but some improvement is required here. So what are we planning in the next time? We have a new scanning tank where we trying to duplicate the results we gained here. So we will use the other skull bones as well to get a bit more statistical relevance here. And we are also investigating into 3D full wave simulations to better understand what is the physics in the mask and how can we improve the system. And next steps actually to move forward is higher complexity faceplates to encode more than a single focus point in the face mask. So I'd like to acknowledge the Max Planck Fraunhofer Pakt für Forschung and under the grant Akusogramme. I'd like to thank all the co-authors and the whole group at Fraunhofer IBMT and you for your attention.
One question from the audience? Yeah.
you. Thank you for a nice talk. In theory, when you use the lens in front of your multi-element transducer, the thickness of the lens could incorporate details that are smaller than the size of the one single element. So the correction could be potentially better than with phase aberration, but here it's not the case. So how do you explain that? Do you have the same thickness in front of the transducer? Is it homogeneous or did you vary?
Actually, yes, we don't have a smooth mask at present. We have a columnar mask. So as I said, in front of each element, we actually have a column which has the same lateral size as the element itself. So that is what I told, what is a potential improvement. Of course, I can increase the granularity of the mask, but keeping the count of the elements low as it is here. And that is maybe a great potential in improving the technology, but thank you for the question.
There is an online question. How do we get the online question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you for your presentation. It was amazing. But I was just wondering, maybe I lost this information. What was the frequency you were using in your measurements?
It is around 500 kilohertz, 480 kilohertz precisely.
Okay, thank you so much.
Welcome.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, our next presentation, Hiro Kusunos. Oh, there he is. Patient-specific stereotactic frame for repeated transcranial ultrasound therapy.
All right. Hi, I'm Jiro Kusunose, and I work with Dr. Charles Caskey at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. And as was introduced, I'll be presenting on our work on designing and characterizing a patient-specific stereotactic frame for transcranial ultrasound therapy. And so a little bit of background, as pretty much everyone here is aware, FUS is a unique tool that you can target deep areas in the tissue with millimeter precision, and used for treating for treatments such as ablation to histotripsy to BBBO and neuromodulation. In transcranial focused ultrasound, though, the transmission of sound through the skull leads to focal aberration and shift, so we need to precisely localize the focus, or otherwise we can end up with unwanted treatments inside the brain. And so for the localization, currently MRI seems to be the most reliable means for localizing the focus itself. So MR-guided focused ultrasound imaging is the current choice for precise TFUS. And here we see one that's set up in the Exoblate Neuro. However, as we saw from many of the talks today and yesterday, a lot of treatments could benefit from repeated sessions of low-intensity focused ultrasound. And so employing MR imaging each time for treatments that you're going to do a couple times over a month or period of week, it can be both financially and logistically a hurdle. And so if we could be able to perform those procedures with the same level of accuracy, both inside and outside the MRI, that would be ideal. So how might we go about and register it with a pre-acquired patient scan? And this will allow for you to overlay the focus onto the patient's patient image. However, we typically see an error of 2 to 3 millimeters with just the optical tracking, and this would get compounded by the skull shift. So our lab, we have kind of figured out a way to improve this with compensating with MR imaging. And if you're interested in that, Tony Phipps at Promo Lab will be presenting, has a poster presentation, so I recommend checking that out. But another approach could be simply to mechanically secure the patient and the transducer orientation inside the magnet, and then recreate it outside the magnet, which might be tricky, but devious stereotactic frames have been shown to have sub-millimeter precision in guiding the needle to the brain target, and is compact. And as you can see from here, the StarFix frame is quite compact and is MR compatible. And so, can we leverage the consistency of the devious stereotactic frames for repeated steered T+ therapy outside the MRI? So we set out, therefore, to incorporate an array transducer into a compact, removable, patient-specific stereotactic frame for use inside and outside MRI and characterize performance. This would allow us to localize the focus and do steering adjustments inside the MRI, and then continue the treatment outside the MRI. So for this study, the process, we broke it down to designing and fabricating the frame, registering the transducer steering space to the planned CT space, then using MR thermometry or acoustic radiation force imaging to localize the bus focus, and then to register those individual foci space back into the planned CT space. And then finally, assessing the frame's accuracy and repeatability by characterizing the targeting error and mean deviation. And we did that over multiple sessions. So we started off with designing a frame for an ex vivo skull. For it, we acquired the skull first, and then we implanted 4 waypoint bone anchors currently used for DBS procedures into it, as seen. Oh well. Oh, there you go. Seen there. And then we acquired the CT of it. And then we imported it into Cranial Ball Explorer, which is a DBS planning suit developed at Vanderbilt University, which allows for the automatic extraction of the location of the waypoint anchor. And so with the skull CT and the waypoint anchor information, there you go. We designed the frame here shown in red and made it to accommodate a transducer that's 128. Whoa. All right. Oh, you can see it right there. The 128 element 650 kilohertz transducer with 72 millimeter radius of curvature and has a focus of 9.3 by 2.2. And then in this planned CT, we designated the location where the geometric focus would fall as T0. And then we also wanted to come up with a target. So we overlaid the an HB MRI over the skull to get some anatomical context. And then we found out where the right thalamus would approximately lie. So we chose a right thalamus coordinate and designated that as TRT. So great, now we have a planned CT with the both targets. Now we need to relate it back to an MR space, since we'll be acquiring everything in MR. So first, we have fixed MR-CT fiducials onto the transducer legs. And then we acquired another CT with the head frame and the skull together. And then we extracted the anchor locations using Crave again and registered those together. And then we needed to get the information of how the transducer is oriented relative to the frame. And so we steered the plus focus into an agarose phantom in the MRI, and then we acquired the MR focus information in MR space. And then those are registered together. And then since both we've got the fiducials both in CT space and MR space, we registered those together to relate the bus steering to the planned CT space. So now after the actual experiment, we first filled the skull with a graphite agarose phantom and then acquired a T1 scan and registered to the planned CT. This essentially allowed us to be able to see where the right thalamus target was in the MR image. And then we acquired the thermometry at the unsteered focus. And then we could, from this, we could calculate the distance we would need to steer to get to the target. And then we acquired a thermometry there. First time was a little bit off, and so we made some adjustments. And then our second steering target was reasonably close. And so overall for one trial, we acquired data at the S0, this first steering, the core steering at S1, and then the refined one at S2. And so in the following sessions, we have the frame reattached, and each time we acquired data at the S0, S1, S2, and those coordinates were kept constant the whole time. After that, we use these are registered back together using the fiducials. So here we have the axial and lateral plot of all the foci acquired registered together. You can see in the yellow, the yellow dots are the unsteered foci. They're pretty close in the lateral plot. You can also appreciate the axial shift here. This is the T naught, and this is the TRT where we're trying to get to. The blue is the S1, and the red is the S2. So we're getting closer. And so this is the data in number form. Saw that by doing one iteration, we were able to improve the target register TRE from 1.9 to 1.2. And then we also saw a sub-millimeter deviation in the foci location for all the places targeted or all the places steered to. And so we saw a good, suggesting good repeatability. And so it's great news. So we moved on to designing and validating the frame for in vivo. So for the in vivo frame, similar to the ex vivo frame, we started off with implanting bone anchors into time-alive female macaque, and then designed the frame over there. The animal was secured onto an MR compatible table designed to fit and support the stereotactic frame. And then for focus localization, we use MR-RFE instead of thermometry to minimize heating the brain. So we acquired 3 sets of data for this round, and we acquired it at the S0, so the unsteered, the SRT, the right thalamus, and then 2 farther out locations, one that is steered 7 millimeters out, and another that's steered total distance of 10 millimeters out. And then these foci were registered back in the same space, but this time by registering the brain through intensity-based registration. And so for the in vivo study, we first acquired a T1 scan as well as a high-resolution scan. We had a physician come down and locate and specify where she had thought the right thalamus target was. And so we got that coordinate. And then we calculate, and then we acquired the S0, so where the focus is fell. And then we also acquired it at the 7 millimeter out and the 10 millimeter out. Appreciate that the focus shape is still pretty nice and crisp at 10 millimeters out. And then with information from the S0 to the right thalamus target, we calculated how much to steer for. And that one actually came out pretty good. You'll see it in the next slide. But so we only acquired it. We went with that first coordinate that we got. Well, so we went with that. We then repeat, later came back, put the frame back on, acquired the same data 2 more times, and then we register with the intensity-based registration. Here's kind of like our main info that we got. Here are the 3 trials of MRRP that required for targeting the right thalamus target. The original target that was chosen can be seen here in green. It overlaps quite well with the MRRP data here. We didn't show it on the other 2, but they're very close. And again, we can see that the TRE is good with only an N of 3, but with 1.0 millimeter off. And then again, the mean deviation were all sub-millimeter, and they're all in the same ballpark, even for the 7 and 10 millimeter steered out foci. So with that, in conclusion, we were able to design and fabricate a patient-specific stereotactic frame for TFUS. We validated it ex vivo and in vivo, and we found that it had a great accuracy and repeatability. And also another great part is pretty cheap to produce, about $50 for the 3D printing material. And a lot of the infrastructure is kind of already out there with the DBS material and the DBS planning material, software. For future work, we're interested in validating in a few more NHPs as well, and then potentially implanting an electrode and steering the focus around the outside the MRI to get some feedback out there. So feel that we could use the system for high precision TFUS outside the MRI, which has a lot of uses. Since we're using an array transducer, you can do volumetric and multi-target treatments, and feel that this would potentially expand treatments available to patients by quite a bit. And so with that, I'd like to thank my PI, Charles Gaske, and my lab members, especially Tony Phipps and Tom Manuel, as well as collaborators from Vanderbilt Institute for Surgery and Engineering, the Chen Lab and the Grissom Lab from VU, and Peter Conrad from the West Virginia University. Thank you. And if there are any questions.
I was wondering, when you bring it to humans, which I'm really excited for, looks like it's not quite there yet, how are you gonna register to the human head? Or would you use the same thing people do for surgeries? Just because I was telling Leonard, I watched one of these inside tech surgeries, and like people will bleed because this thing is just anchored so hard.
Yeah.
So how do we do it in like a nice, easy to use way repeatably?
Well, once you get it in there, ideally you would keep the, let's see. Well, the screw anchor itself, well, that's the tricky part, is using the anchors. We kind of get to avoid having to getting it back to the same spot each time. That's the tricky part. So in a sense, this would be pretty ideal for like if you want to do simulations, because you can scan it, get the solid orientation together, and do simulation, like perfect your getting through. How to get this to go without any screw? I don't know at the moment. Sorry. Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? All right, so let's thank our speaker again. Okay, one more in this session. This is Kazra Ardavili, and he is online, I can see, so he will be available for questions. He has TUS deep target sonication of subcubic millimeter volumes using crossbeam.
Today, I'll be talking about achieving subcubic millimeter target volumes in transcranial focused ultrasound using a pair of ultrasound transducers that are placed at 90-degree angles with respect to one another, an arrangement we'll be referring to as crossbeam. Before we get started, I would like to go over the outline of the talk. First, I'll be talking about the motivation behind this work. Then we'll take a look at the spatial resolution and target volume with crossbeam. Then I'll go over the acoustic radiation force properties of crossbeam, and we will wrap up the talk with a conclusion slide. The motivation behind this work was really the work we have been doing with our collaborators on studying the salamander retina. What we had noticed was that the neural responses we were recording from the salamander retina in vitro were stronger than in vivo. Our hypothesis was that when we are placing the tissue over the multi-electrode array surface, reflections from the bottom of the MEA surface give rise to standing waves that are effectively sandwiching the tissue, a scenario we do not have in vivo. We'll see in the subsequent slides. But before we go over the simulation results, let's take a look at the intuition behind this. Why is it that the anti-parallel setup does not give you a better spatial resolution than the orthogonal setup? For any ultrasound transducer, the axial beam profile is broader than the lateral beam profile. Therefore, in panel A, when we are placing the two transducers in anti-parallel setup, it is their broad axial beam profiles that are superimposing one another. And the superposition they give rise to, therefore, is also broad. Whereas in panel B, when we are placing two transducers at 90 degrees with respect to one another, it is the lateral beam profile of one transducer that trims the axial beam profile of the other one, and vice versa, effectively giving rise to a much sharper superposition compared to the anti-parallel setup. Let's take a look at some simulation results with this. In panel A, just for your reference, I'm showing the case of a single transducer. The pressure field is what you would expect, a long beam along the axial direction. In panel B, I have placed a second transducer in front of the first one to replicate the anti-parallel setup. Notice how we are successfully generating the standing waves. But in terms of spatial resolution, we have the same beam profile as we see in the single transducer. In panel C, when we place the transducers at 90-degree angles, we are having a much sharper focal spot. In this particular scenario of F1 single element 1 megahertz transducers of 50 millimeter aperture, we are improving the full width at half maximum target volume from 11.78 cubic millimeters down to 0.38 cubic millimeters. That's roughly a 35-fold improvement. Not only that, we are also claiming that the orthogonal setup is the optimal setup, and you cannot improve beyond that. Let's take a look at some simulations for that. In this animation, I'm rotating the transducers from the 180-degree setup down to the orthogonal or the crossbeam setup. Notice how you go from having multiple ripples of hot spots due to standing waves down to only a singular case. Let's be more quantitative. Let's take a look at the beam profiles along different axes. We can take a look at the diagonal axis. In this particular axis, our intensity profile for the orthogonal setup is broader than the other ones, which is expected because if you pay attention to the hot spot, as we are rotating the target, the oval is also rotating and aligning itself with the diagonal axis. But it's not a problem because we are gaining a lot in spatial resolution in the other dimensions, as we'll see. Here is the intensity profile along the anti-diagonal axis. This is the axis along which we are generating the standing waves. As you can see, the three sharp ripples of the red line. Vertical axis is more or less the same for all scenarios. And most importantly, along the horizontal axis, we are able to crush all those ripples that you would see in the anti-parallel setup down to only a single peak at the center, at the target. And this axis is essentially the main axis that allows us to improve our spatial resolution by many folds. Also, another interesting thing here is that this entire setup has a good tolerance. in our simulations, we can be off by about 16 degrees from the normal and still be able to achieve very tight focal spots. The question you may be wondering is, these are all free water simulations. Can we even hit sub-cubic millimeter targets with 1 megahertz transducers transcranially? And the answer is yes. We simulated that also. For that, we simulated placing two 75 millimeter by 75 millimeter phased array transducers, each having 1024 elements, around sheep skull at 90-degree arrangement. Obviously, because we have skull in place, we have to account for phase aberrations, and for that we used hybrid angular spectrum approach, HAZ. In this scenario, we were still able to achieve subcubic target volumes. In this particular case, 0.34 cubic millimeter. So long as we are able to account for the phase aberrations due to skull, we ought to be able to generate subcubic millimeter volumes if we are placing the transducers at crossbeam or orthogonal setup. Before we take a look at the acoustic radiation force properties of the crossbeam, I wanted to go over the exact formula we have used in computing the acoustic radiation force. What you're seeing in the top row is the acoustic radiation force along the X dimension, which is essentially derived from the second order perturbation analysis of pressure, velocity, and density. And the angle brackets are integrals over time, over one full period of the wave. And I'll explain why we are using this. If we use this complete form, this is how we are simulating the acoustic radiation force for a single transducer, which actually matches what we are seeing in MR-RF images. You have these vectors that are representing your force, and they're moving away from the surface of the transducer. They get stronger at the hot spot at the target, and they keep moving away from the transducer. If we apply quasi-planar wave assumption, whereby we just assume that the mean Eulerian excess pressure is 0, we get erroneous results. In this case, you can see that the Y dimension of the forces are much longer than the X dimension, which doesn't make any sense because your transducer is placed on the left. And so you'd expect the bulk of the arrows to be pointing from left to right rather than up to down along the vertical axis. And if we apply even more simplifying assumptions, if we assume we have purely planar waves, in addition to assuming the mean Eulerian excess pressure is 0, we also have to get rid of all the cross terms in our differentials. And that gives rise to even more erroneous results, because effectively what you're left with is just a simple gradient of your pressure field. As a result, this kind of a vector field would suggest that at the focus, you have this unstable equilibrium, that if you were to place a particle, it is either going to be pushed away from that hot spot from the target or pulled towards the surface of the transducer, which clearly is wrong. And lastly, obviously, we cannot use this even further simplified form 2 alpha I over C, which is commonly used in the field, because it really, in addition to assuming purely planar waves, it also assumes exponential decay of your intensity. And it also gives you no sense of direction for the force. So we cannot use that either. For these reasons, we have decided to go with the complete form of acoustic radiation force. Now let's see what it looks like. This is the acoustic radiation force field that we see with the orthogonal setup. If we zoom in, you can see we have these regions of sinks and sources. At the hot spot, at the target, forces are converging. If we were to place a neural tissue there, it's going to be pinched tissue. And right on either side of that, we have these sources where the forces are divergent in those regions, meaning if we subject neural populations to those regions, they're going to be pulled. Our collaborators, Mike Menz and Steve Backus, wanted to take a look at visualizing this. So what they did was that they suspended glass beads in water under that orthogonal setup. And what they saw exactly matches what we are seeing in simulation, that you have regions that you're pinching and regions that you're pulling. At the moment, we are looking into studying whether neural subpopulations are going to show differential response to being pulled versus being pinched. Let's conclude the talk. A lot of the targets that we're interested in sonicating are deep within the brain, and they're also in sensitive areas. So we want to be able to sonicate deep, and we want to be able to sonicate at a finer spatial resolution. The problem with using a single transducer is that as we go deeper in the brain, the axial beam profile becomes broader and broader. So we are unable to really sonicate fine targets. Moreover, we can't just account for it by increasing the frequency. I mean, that will only get us so far. If we are increasing the frequency beyond a certain point, we can't even deposit any energy due to attenuations. Not to mention that we are going to have skull heating and worsened aberrations. Whereas if we use two transducers that are placed orthogonally with respect to one another, we are able to achieve sub-cubic millimeters with frequencies as low as 1 megahertz. But in addition to that, as we saw in the acoustic radiation force slide, the previous one, we are also able to generate these regions of pinch and pull. And it will be interesting to see whether neurons show differential response to being pinched versus being pulled. And if it is the case, that's going to give us yet another method to be able to finally control the response of the neural populations to focused ultrasound. Thank you.
Yeah, so I can see Kazra is available online if there's questions from the audience. Okay, I'll start with a question. Kazra? Wait,
Yes.
no, we should see him, not me. Okay, good. So it's going a little bit against conventional wisdom to use such a high frequency when we think about the going across the skull. So maybe could you comment on maybe lower frequencies and how it might work?
I don't have numbers off the top of my head for, to give you quantitative answer, what sort of resolutions would be looking at with lower frequency. But the physics is there still in that if you're placing the transducers orthogonally, you're definitely going to improve your spatial resolution in contrast to using a single transducer. The other thing that I didn't include in these slides is that the focusing power of the transducer matters as well. For example, the F number. So one would need to run simulations to get a better sense of whether you're going to be able to really improve your spatial resolution by, in this case, like 35-fold that I was showing. The most important thing is, I don't know if you guys are able to go back on the slides here. But on the slide where I'm showing the intensity along the diagonal, anti-diagonal, vertical, and horizontal axes, along the anti-diagonal axis where we are generating the, let's take a look at this one, for example, the horizontal axis. In this case, we are for sure going to see the improvement in resolution because you can see we crush all of those ripples or the standing waves that you see when you're placing the transducers at 180 degrees. But if you look at the anti-diagonal axis, where we have the standing waves with the orthogonal setup, you have three main peaks. You want to make sure that the side peaks are always below your full width at half max. And that is guaranteed if you have high focusing power transducer, independent of really your frequency. So really simulations need to be run to get quantitative answers as to how much improvement you're going to get. But if the question is, are you going to get multiple fold improvement? The answer is yes, for sure.
Okay, we have another question, Sam. Oh, and then after that, Andre.
Hi, Katra. Great job. I wondered if you explore the possibility to use single element transducer to the skull to try to see this particular positioning of the transducers, single elements crossing through the skull, and you manage to still have these nice crossing beams.
If I may, I would like to repeat the question to make sure I fully heard you. Is the question whether we are going to be able to achieve such tight foci if we are using single element transducers?
Yeah, exactly, through the skull, yeah.
I'm afraid not, because with a single element transducer, we are still going to face the aberrations due to skull, and we need to account for those. And a single transducer is not going to be able to do that. So for that scenario, we need phased arrays so that we can time the transducer elements accordingly. On the slide where I showed the sheep skull, that's an example for this, where we had to actually use phased array transducers to account for the aberrations.
Maybe I will maybe be a little more positive. For example, in human skulls and very low frequency, 250 kilohertz, probably will be a very nice, something at least to give a shot from the work, because you low frequencies, you don't have so much refraction effect. You might have a possibility to do that, especially as kind of connected with the team's comments. Maybe going low frequency might open very interesting opportunities.
Thank you so much for the suggestion. I haven't tried frequencies as low as 200 kilohertz, but I'll simulate that. That's a good suggestion. Thank you.
All right, I think Andre had a question behind
Yep.
you.
Thanks. This was a great talk. I was wondering if you could speculate about the robustness if, for example, you don't correct fully for the aberrations introduced by the skull. So would you think that in this case, the non-perfect orthogonality of the transducers would still give you better focus?
Thanks for the question. So it is actually important that we make sure the beams intersect at the target. So the first thing is you want them to intersect because we want to get the superposition. But is it necessary to get exactly 90 degrees? It is ideal if you get 90 degrees, but there is some tolerance here. As we see on the same slide, even if you're off by about 16 degrees from the normal, you're still able to generate very tight focal spots compared to using a single transducer. But still, that tricky part is there that you need to make sure that your beams do intersect. One of the things we are looking into is coming up with different MR pulse sequences so that we can actually pick out the focus with MR RP in the arrangement where we have the transducers at 90 degrees. That's an ongoing work in our lab.
So yeah, thanks for the nice talk. Also, just a comment.
Thank you.
Following on Samuel Ricardo, so I think it can be a bit more positive. There's a paper on the same topic in brain stimulation 2021 from Kim from KAIST, and they basically used two simulations of two focus transducers, and that worked out quite fine at 500 kilohertz in humans. I think it depends a lot on where you place these transducers, whether you then get complex effects, but for many areas of the skull is kind of a two-layer lens, you could say, so that it's relatively predictable what it does, and then it seems to work. It will not work when you have sutures underneath, for example, then you need more complex focus. But in general, I think it could be also working with more primitive focus transducers. Yeah, one element.
Yeah, thank you very much for that comment. This is it's great that you bring that up because one of the motivations behind this is also that the versatility, right? If you have two transducers, you can easily place them anywhere along the skull, over the skull. So if there are regions where, as you mentioned, say the skull is not as porous and you're not as concerned about the aberrative effects, then we could place the transducers there and still make sure, obviously, that we are at the 90-degree arrangements. But yes. Thanks for that comment.
Okay, I think one more question.
Okay, I'm going to return to 2 questions ago about the robustness of the positioning of the transducers. You clearly showed that the rotation has some robustness within maybe 20 degrees. However, if the 2 transducers are translated even a couple of millimeters, or your phase correction is not correct and you have the foci offset by a few millimeters, I would be worried that either you get destructive coherence and you reduce your effect, or you get side lobes that are very high in pressure. Have you looked at that at all? Thank you.
That's a great question. My answer is no. I have not looked at the case where I am off to inspect the results, but that's a great question. I should actually look into that. Thanks for that.
Great, thank you so much. Let's give him another hand.
Thanks, everyone.
And I think it's time for a coffee break.